I never imagined I would tell this story, not the way it happened with all the details, without skipping the parts that make me uncomfortable. I put it off for a long time, first because I didn't know how to name what had happened, then because naming it meant admitting it was real. And for a long time, it was easier to let the thing exist only inside me, like a kind of secret that didn't demand to be let out, that didn't bother me as long as it stayed quiet. But I've learned in the last few months that holding on to things too tightly doesn't preserve them. It only distorts them. So here it goes. My name is Lucas. I'm 22 years old. I work part-time at a small design studio, and I have the best friend in the world. His name is Gabriel. We've been friends for 7 years, the kind of friendship that doesn't need an explanation, that survives weeks without contact and picks up right where it left off, always, as if no time had passed at all. Gabriel's family house was almost my second home, the kind of place where I felt more at home than in my own apartment, which probably says more about my apartment than about me, but it also says something about me. And it was in that house that everything started. It was late on a Friday night, going into Saturday. I was sleeping in the guest room. That happened often. Gabriel's mom, Claudia, always made it clear that I was welcome, that the room was always ready, that I didn't even need to let them know. It must have been around 2 in the morning when I woke up thirsty. I got up in the dark, groggy from sleep, in that haze where you're awake enough to walk, but not quite awake enough to think much. I headed toward the bathroom in the hallway. That's when I almost bumped into him. Raphael was standing in the hallway, his back to the faint light coming from the window at the end of it. We almost ran into each other. I took a step to the side, he did too, in the exact same direction. One of those moments of involuntary dancing where you rush to get out of the way and end up stepping into the same spot as the other person, and both of you just stand there for a second, deciding who steps around who. I looked up, and he was looking at me. It wasn't the kind of look you exchange in a dark hallway at 2 in the morning. That distracted glance from someone who wasn't expecting to run into anyone, that passes in a fraction of a second and moves on without leaving a trace. It was a look that lingered. That lasted longer than it should have to be a coincidence, longer than anything casual could justify. That cut through the dark and found something in me that I didn't know was visible. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. The house went silent, that weight of quiet when everyone's asleep. The hallway stretched forever. 5 seconds. 10? I can't say. The clock was ticking at a different speed. After a moment that went on way too long to be casual, he took a step to the side. He cleared the way. I walked past. I went into the bathroom, closed the door carefully so as not to make a sound, and stood there holding the edge of the sink. The mirror in front of me showed someone who was trying to process what had just happened. My heart was beating faster than it should for someone who had just gone to get a glass of water. I stood there for about 2-3 minutes. I turned on the faucet just to have something to do with my hands. I drank water I didn't even want anymore. I don't know exactly what I was expecting to happen, for the feeling to pass, for it to get smaller and more manageable, for it to make sense. None of those things happened. I went back to the room, lay down in the dark, and stared at the ceiling until the sun started to rise outside, listening to the house breathe around me. You know what it's like when someone sees you, truly sees you, when you were so used to being invisible. Gabriel and I met when we were 15. It was my freshman year at the new high school, when I had just transferred and was in that state of quiet vulnerability that teenagers disguise with indifference, with that I don't care attitude that covers up exactly how much they do care. I was the kind of person who preferred not to be noticed rather than being noticed the wrong way. So I kept quiet, observed, and waited to understand the rules of the place before actually starting to exist in it. Gabriel didn't operate like that. He walked in, sat next to me in the first class on a random Thursday, and started talking as if we had known each other for years. As if my presence there was obvious and welcome and worthy of comment. As if the idea that I might not want to talk hadn't even crossed his mind. Not out of carelessness, but out of a genuine belief that people in general are more open than they seem when someone treats them as if they are. He was right in my case. 7 years later, it's still like that. It's still exactly like that. Gabriel walks into a room and lights it up effortlessly, not because he's putting on a show of happiness, but because he genuinely finds the world more interesting than most people do. He's loud in the best possible way, the kind of person whose presence you feel when they walk into the room and whose absence you feel when they leave. His family's house gradually became my second home over the years. My own family is distant, not geographically because we live in the same city, in the same daily routine, but emotionally. There's always been a coldness in our relationships at home. I learned early not to question it, not to feed it. The place where I grew up functioned. It had the necessities, but it lacked that sense of belonging that makes a place more than just an address. Gabriel's house was different. There was always food on the table, conversations that expected answers, and Claudia asking how I was with an attention that wasn't just a formality. I started showing up there with increasing frequency without anyone needing to discuss it. It just happened, and no one found it strange, and after a while, I had a drawer in the guest room and knew where all the medicine was kept. Claudia's a 43-year-old event coordinator who feeds people as an act of love. She's got this warm, practical presence that makes any space feel intentional, welcoming, like her being somewhere means the place is ready for you. When I arrived at her house, looking like I'd had a rough week without saying a word about it, she would simply place something in front of me and continue what she was doing, as if she understood that sometimes what a person needs isn't a conversation but a presence. I admire her genuinely, in a way that isn't performative. She was good to me for years, in the quietest way possible, without ever drawing attention to it. And this fact, her real, unprompted care, would be one of the things that weighed on me the most in the following months, when I realized what was happening with her husband. She married Raphael 2 years before this story. Gabriel's biological father, who lives in another city and with whom Gabriel maintains a functional relationship but lacks any deep emotional closeness, had been out of the picture for a long time. Claudia had a period on her own after that, and then she met Raphael, and after a while, they got married. Gabriel's reaction when he found out, a shrug at first, a cautious acceptance later. Raphael didn't try to be Gabriel's father. With a 20-year-old son, that would be difficult anyway, but Raphael also didn't seem to have any ambition in that regard. He entered the family's life as Claudia's partner, not as a parental figure, and this clarity made things easier. What emerged between the two of them was a friendly coexistence, two adults sharing a house with mutual respect, without the emotional obligations that neither of them had asked for. I met Raphael at a Sunday lunch, one of those weekend lunches Claudia organized sometimes. The airy house, the smell of good food coming from the kitchen, that lazy and generous Sunday atmosphere. He was in the kitchen when I arrived, helping with something, and Gabriel introduced me with the carefree lightness of someone introducing something obvious. "This is Raphael," and turned away to continue another conversation. Raphael shook my hand, looked me straight in the eye, asked for my name in a way that made it clear he wanted to memorize it, not just follow the protocol of someone being introduced. My first impression, a man who listens more than he speaks. No act, no performance. 44, civil engineer, owns his own firm. He's got this presence, takes up exactly the right amount of space. Doesn't fade away, doesn't crowd you out. One of those people who's made peace with themselves, stopped fighting the internal war. Quieter because of it, more present, more whole. I noticed him at that lunch, but I told myself it was the kind of attention any unusual person deserves. A neutral observation, the same interest I'd have in anyone with a striking presence. Nothing more. But I know, looking back, that I was lying to myself. In the months between that Sunday lunch and the hallway, I started noticing Raphael without meaning to. Not actively, not consciously, he'd just appear in my field of vision and I'd notice. The way he moves through a house without taking up more space than necessary. A quiet efficiency, as if he knew exactly where he needed to be and didn't waste any movement or attention. In crowded rooms, he tends to stay quieter, as if he had learned that presence works better when it's not competing with the noise. In smaller settings, with fewer people, he expands a bit, not in the sense of dominating, but in the sense of being more there, more accessible. There was one specific afternoon that stayed in my memory with a sharpness that bothers me to this day. It was a Saturday, that heavy kind of heat from the São Paulo countryside that isn't just temperature, it's weight. Gabriel had gone to get some things from his room, It was going to take a few minutes, and I was on the living room couch trying to look useful with my phone, doing what you do when you're alone in a place that isn't yours, a combination of not touching anything and pretending to be busy. The living room window looked out onto the backyard. Raphael was there, fixing a part of the fence that had given way during the previous week's rain. He worked with a quiet concentration. There was something deliberate in the way he did things, as if he believed that every task was worth doing right from beginning to end without shortcuts. There was no rush. There was method. I might have stared out that window for a bit too long. I looked at my phone. I couldn't focus on what I was trying to read. I looked back at the window. Raphael had moved to another part of the fence, still with his back to the house. Gabriel came down the stairs yelling something about not finding his t-shirt. I replied that I had no idea. And I forced myself to look at my phone screen and not look up again. But the moment lingered. The moment always lingered. There was also a dinner about 3 weeks later, one of those more spontaneous nights when I had shown up to pick up Gabriel to go out and ended up staying because Claudia insisted. The conversation fragmented into smaller subgroups at the table, as it does, and I ended up quiet while she and Gabriel excitedly discussed something about family logistics. Raphael was next to me, after a silence that could easily have been awkward but simply wasn't, because silence with Raphael rarely felt heavy, and I had already started to notice that he asked me what I did for a living. Not the standard version of the question, the one people ask to fill space. He asked what I actually wanted to do with design, not as an abstract profession, but as a personal intention, as a life project. What interested me about it, where I wanted to go with it. No one had ever asked me that question quite like that. I heard myself giving a real answer, which was also unusual, talking about art direction, about the visual language of things, about how I believed images could tell stories that words can't reach, about the projects I actually found interesting versus the ones I did because they paid the bills. He listened without interrupting, without looking at his phone, without showing signs of just waiting for his turn to speak. When I finished, he asked a follow-up question that showed he had paid attention to every detail, and then spoke briefly about how he saw something similar in architecture. The tension between what a space functionally needs to be and what it means to the people who will live inside it. When dinner was over and I was saying my goodbyes at the door, I realized 40 minutes had passed since our conversation began. 40 minutes I hadn't noticed slipping by, which, for someone who is usually very aware of time in social situations, was a piece of information in itself. I tried not to think about it, about the way he asked, about the way I felt heard in a manner that wasn't usual for me, that wasn't what I expected when I came to that house, about the fact that 40 minutes had gone by without me wanting them to end. But sometimes we try not to think about things exactly because they matter too much. And the attempt not to think is, in itself, a form of thinking. It's an attention you direct toward the forbidden object precisely by trying to avoid it. And it was with all this accumulated context, months of a fascination I refused to label, moments that lingered when they should have passed, a ruthless clarity that certain memories had while others didn't, that I walked into that hallway at 2 a.m. And Raphael was there, and neither of us looked away. Now the hallway makes a different kind of sense, doesn't it? In the weeks following the night in the hallway, I did what any reasonable person would do in that situation. I made up excuses not to go to Gabriel's house. I had a deadline at work, which was partly true. There's always a deadline at work. I was tired, also partly true. I wasn't sleeping well. I had other plans. That was a flat-out lie, but Gabriel didn't investigate. He noticed. Gabriel always notices when something is off, and he texted me asking if I was okay, assuming it was work stress or some story with someone I hadn't told him about yet. I let him assume that. It was easier than the alternative. The truth was that I needed distance to understand what had happened in the hallway. Or more honestly, to try and convince myself that nothing had happened, or that what did happen was small enough to fit into a safe explanation. That I had projected it. That I was tired that night and seeing things that weren't there. That Raphael had simply looked at me because I was right there, in front of him. And looking at someone who is in front of you is the most natural thing in the world. That didn't last long, because the first time I went back, and I did go back. Of course I went back. A prolonged absence would require an explanation I didn't have. I arrived on a Saturday afternoon. Gabriel was home, Raphael was home, Claudia had baked a cake, and life was moving at a completely normal pace. We hung out in the living room watching something on TV. There was cake, there was Gabriel's commentary on what we were watching. There was the familiar sound of that house running. Everything was exactly the same as before. Except that at one point, Raphael crossed the room to get something from the kitchen, and for a second, exactly 1 second, no more than that, our eyes met as he walked by. There was no pause, there was no gesture. He kept walking. I stayed seated. Gabriel was making some comment about the scene playing on TV. But I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to decode that second. Was it just recognition, the natural thing of seeing someone you know, an echo from the hallway? Or was I making it mean something, giving weight to nothing, because I needed it to? Because reciprocation was easier than one-sided? This loop ran for days. At work, staring at blank projects, my boss even asked if I was okay, which meant it was showing. At the gym, hoping exhaustion would push the thoughts out. It didn't. Body tired, mind stuck. At night was worst. No distractions, just the dark and an honesty I didn't ask for. The same elements. The hallway, the look, the afternoon through the window, the dinner conversation, the 40 minutes that slipped by without warning. Assembling and disassembling as if the answer might change if I looked at them from different angles enough times. I know this pattern. It's what we do when we're not ready to accept what we already know. We create variations, test alternative hypotheses, and look for the interpretation that makes the situation less complicated than it is. But the situation didn't get any less complicated. It only became more defined with every revisit. There was also a persistent, annoying guilt during this period, which was this. I worried about what I was capable of feeling just as much as what I was actually feeling. Not just the attraction. The fact that I'd spent months in Gabriel's house feeling all of this without him knowing. There was a betrayal in that silence, and I knew it. But I still couldn't imagine telling him. And then the water moment happened. It was a weekday afternoon. Gabriel had gotten home before me and was doing something in his room. I went to the kitchen to wait. Claudia was in the backyard. I could hear her talking to someone outside through the open window. Raphael walked into the kitchen maybe 30 seconds after me. 30 seconds is a long time when you're counting. It's surprising how hyper-aware you can be of the space in a room when you know a certain person is about to walk into it, where you're standing, what you're doing with your hands, whether your back is turned or you're facing the door. He went to the cabinet, grabbed a glass and walked to the faucet. He didn't say anything. He turned on the tap, stood there waiting for the water to get cold. Then, without taking his eyes off the glass, he asked, "Want water?" 2 words. The kind of thing anyone says to anyone in any kitchen on any afternoon. Nothing more. I said no. He finished filling his glass, took a sip and set it back on the sink. He stood there for another moment, doing nothing in particular, and then left the kitchen. Gabriel came down the stairs a minute later, making enough noise for 2, announcing some plan for the weekend. I spent days thinking that I should have said yes. I can't explain why. Water's just water. It means nothing. But that moment, that question without a glance, that small opening stuck with me out of proportion to everything. Like he was asking on a deeper level, and I was answering on a deeper level without knowing which question I was saying no to. What would have happened if I had said yes? Probably nothing. He'd have filled another glass, stood there another 30 seconds and left. But I wanted to have found out. And the fact that I wanted to find out already revealed more than I'd like to admit. Claudia threw a casual get-together in early September. Friends, family, a few neighbors, the kind of gathering she puts together with effortless ease, where the house opens up and absorbs 20 people without feeling forced. There was plenty of food, music playing at a volume that allowed for conversation, and that organic movement of people who have known each other for years and are just as comfortable with mutual silence as they are with talking. I was Gabriel's best friend, which meant I belonged there without having to justify my presence. I could wander through the whole space, go into the kitchen to get water, or step out onto the porch if I needed air without anyone thinking it was weird, which also meant my comings and goings went completely unnoticed. It was around the peak of the afternoon, when most people had migrated indoors, the heat was heavy and the living room's AC was calling more than the back porch. I had stepped out to catch my breath, the way I sometimes need to when I've been in a social setting for too long. Not because I'm upset, just because I need a minute with no stimulation. I stood with my back to the house, looking at the backyard I'd known for years. I heard footsteps on the porch. Raphael came out to check on the grill, which had been left lit and forgotten when the conversation pulled everyone inside. He stood next to me, checked the grill, silence the kind I'd started to recognize with Raphael. No weight to it, no pressure to fill it, just space we shared. Then he asked how work was going, and we started talking. I can't say how long it lasted. 5 minutes, 10, maybe more. We talked about architecture and design like we had at dinner months ago, but more loosely now, more sideways, without the formality of a conversation still introducing itself. He mentioned a project he was working on, a building on a hillside, where the main challenge was to create something that belonged to that space instead of competing with it. Something that followed the topography instead of correcting it. I talked about a project at the studio where we were trying to create a visual identity for a brand that didn't yet know what it wanted to be. The hardest kind, where you're solving two problems at the same time. Sometimes the client doesn't know what they want because they still don't know who they are, he said, in a way that didn't sound like a cliché. That happens to more people than just clients, I said. He gave me a sidelong glance. There was recognition in that look, the kind of look from someone who heard something they already knew and was relieved someone else knew it too. The afternoon sun was at that angle that makes everything look sharper, more etched. We stayed in silence. Inside, Gabriel's voice was laughing with someone with that intensity only he has. "Are you okay?" Raphael asked. It slipped past any tone of politeness. There was a different urgency to it, genuine, direct, the kind that catches you off guard because you weren't expecting the question to be real rather than just protocol. "I am," I said. "I just needed a minute." He nodded as if he understood exactly what I meant without me needing to explain further. Maybe he actually did. Shortly after, Claudia yelled from inside that someone was looking for him. Raphael went back into the house with that quiet efficiency I had learned to recognize. I stayed on the porch alone for another 2 minutes, staring at the backyard, trying to understand what had happened in those 10 minutes of conversation about nothing that seemed to have said something different. When I went inside, Gabriel met me in the hallway with that analytical look of his. The friend who knows you too well not to notice when something is off, but also respects you enough not to push. "What is it?" he asked. "You're acting weird." "I'm tired," I said. "It's been a rough week." He accepted the answer, but kept studying me for a second longer than was casual. Gabriel isn't naive. He's oblivious sometimes because he trusts the people he loves, and that trust creates a sort of selective blindness, not carelessness. But when he focuses, he really focuses. 7 years of friendship, he knew me too well, and I was afraid of how much that meant now that I had something to hide. It was a Wednesday in September when Gabriel asked me for a favor. He needed help with a presentation he had prepared for a project at his dad's work, wanted a second pair of eyes before sending it off. I went over to his house after my shift at the studio around 6 in the evening. Claudia was out work or a social commitment. He had mentioned it in passing, I couldn't remember which. Gabriel and I went up to his office. I read through the slides as he explained the reasoning behind each one. It was good work. He has a natural clarity of thought that sometimes gets a little lost in the visual execution, which is where I came in. We were in the middle of the third version of a slide when his phone rang. Work, his dad's secretary, with some urgency that couldn't wait. Gabriel gave the universal 1-second gesture and stepped out of the office to answer. I stayed in front of the laptop waiting. 10 minutes. I kept looking at the slides, making mental notes. 20 minutes. I texted him asking if everything was okay. He replied, "A bit longer, sorry, annoying stuff." 30 minutes. I decided to head downstairs so I wouldn't just sit there waiting without knowing when he'd be back. I walked into the kitchen. Raphael was there, his back to the door, warming something up on the stove. He heard my footsteps and looked over his shoulder. "Gabriel is on the phone," I said unnecessarily because he obviously knew. "I know, it's been a while." I sat on the counter stool without thinking much of it. He continued with what he was doing, unhurried. The silence settled in that way I had learned to recognize, with Raphael not empty, more like a comfortable quietness, one that didn't demand words to justify our presence in the same room. "How's the hillside project going?" I asked. He turned slightly to look at me, not exactly with surprise, but with that look of someone who wasn't expecting me to remember the detail. "Moving along," he said. "More complicated than I figured when I took it on. But the good kind of complicated, the kind that teaches you something." We talked about the project for a while, then about an architectural photography exhibition I had seen at the studio weeks before, by chance. They were conversations that were about specific things, and at the same time about how those things related to the way we view the world, and that second level, the subtext of the conversation, gradually grew until at some point we were no longer talking about architecture. He asked me about my family. Not abruptly, it came up naturally from a passing reference I'd made on the balcony the day of the meeting about learning to take up less space. I gave an honest answer, more honest than I usually gave to people who asked that question, which surprised me even as I was speaking. I talked about the silence at home, how I learned early that peace meant not demanding presence, not demanding conversation, not demanding to be seen, how certain parts of me had to stay hidden because the alternative cost too much. Raphael just listened, no interruptions, no waiting for his turn. When I finished, he paused, not because he had nothing to say, but because he was choosing his words carefully. "I understand that," he said. "I spent a good part of my adult life learning to exist in spaces that didn't fully fit me, making things seem like they fit when they didn't." That hit different. Not because it was dramatic, it was quiet actually, the calm of someone at peace with what he's saying, but I understood exactly, not vague, not metaphorical. I understood specifically the way you do when two people are talking about the same thing without saying it. And he knew I had understood. There was a mutual recognition in that moment that didn't need a label to be real. We sat in silence. Later, I reached for my water on the counter and Raphael moved the same direction at the same time, both not knowing our hands touched. A fraction of a second. Technically nothing, the kind of thing that happens all the time and means nothing because it's accidental. It was nothing in a way that made my chest stop for an entire heartbeat. We didn't speak about it. We didn't pull back with that overdone gesture that would have made it bigger by shrinking it. The moment just absorbed into the situation and moved on, as if nothing changed, as if the temperature didn't shift. Gabriel got off the phone shortly after. He came down the stairs, announcing his return with that energy of his, filling the space with the normalcy of his presence. The afternoon settled back into its usual rhythm. We finished looking at the presentation. I gave my feedback. I left around 8. On the way home, in the slow traffic back, I repeated to myself several times, nothing had happened. Nothing happened. There was nothing that needed to be processed or interpreted. Two men in a small space, a 1-second accidental collision, a conversation that went too far and then pulled back. But I knew, the way you know certain things before you have the words for them, that something had changed forever. I stopped going to Gabriel's house for 3 weeks. No elaborate excuses this time. Work was heavy, true enough. Gabriel invited me to other things, movies, food, bars. I went. I wasn't avoiding Gabriel. I was avoiding the geography of that house, the kitchen, the living room, the hallway, spaces that had become something I didn't know how to face. In those 3 weeks, something important happened. I stopped not naming it. Not all at once, more like a surrender than a decision. One night in my apartment, after a shift where I'd concentrated on nothing and produced nothing, I finally sat with it. Without dodging it, without reframing it as curiosity or admiration, or whatever I'd been calling it to keep it small. I was attracted to my best friend's stepdad. I sat with that sentence in my head for a long moment after forming it. It wasn't exactly news. The pieces had all been there from before, and on some level I always knew what I was putting together. But knowing and being willing to say it, even if just to yourself, in an apartment at 11 at night, are different things. Months of accumulated attention, conversations that stuck in my memory with that specific sharpness of things that matter. Moments I revisited for no apparent reason, because I couldn't stop revisiting them. It wasn't abstract admiration, it was attraction. The kind that settles into your bones, that doesn't disappear just because you decide it should. And there was something happening between us that I hadn't started and simply wasn't managing to ignore. I thought about Gabriel, what this friendship was and what I'd lose. Not hypothetically, concretely. He wasn't just someone I liked. He was the one who offered me belonging at 15 when I didn't know I needed it. The family I built because mine didn't work. Losing him meant losing my foundation. I thought about Claudia, who had been good to me for years, who didn't deserve to become a silent, supporting character in a story that was unfolding inside her home, around her table. In the kitchen she kept full of food and light. I thought about who I was becoming. That was the hardest part. Not the attraction, which was at least involuntary, but what it made me in the context of those people. I wasn't the guy I wanted to be in this story. The friend who stared at the stepdad, who lingered by the living room window, who spent months accumulating attention I never asked permission to have. I thought a lot about this, sat with it for nights without resolving it because there was no clean resolution. No argument made me the hero, but none made me the villain either. More complicated than that. Human in the uncomfortable way. And then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I was honest with myself without trying to fix myself immediately afterward. I didn't eradicate the feeling. I didn't pretend it didn't exist. I didn't decide that the solution was to never return to that house and leave Gabriel without an explanation. I just sat with the weight of what I was feeling. The attraction, the guilt, the impossibility of the whole geometry without trying to resolve everything in one night. The phone rang. Gabriel. "Just checking in," he said. "Quick call." He was pumped about a trip he was planning, talking fast with that energy he gets when he's excited. I listened, said the right things, laughed at the right moments, asked about details. I was the friend I was. When we hung up, I sat in the silence of my apartment for a long time. The guilt didn't make the feeling disappear. It just stood beside it, like a second shadow. 3 weeks after that night, Gabriel called me with a sense of urgency. Not a dramatic emergency, just tight logistics. He had forgotten a folder with documents at home that he needed to deliver before 6, and the office where he worked was on the way to his family's house. He would be there when I arrived, but he had a meeting scheduled in 50 minutes and would need to leave right after letting me in. A 10-minute thing, he assured me. I went. It was exactly as he had described. He was there, flustered with that chaotic rush of someone running late for something of minor importance, looking for the folder in a cabinet where he knew it was, but somehow it wasn't showing up. He found it in 3 minutes, spent another 7 talking to me in the hallway about a work project and the travel plans, still excited. Then he left. "I'll call you later, thanks." And the door closed behind him with that definitive thud of a door shutting with intent. Claudia was traveling for work. I knew this because Gabriel had mentioned it in passing. I went downstairs to leave. Raphael was in the living room, sketchbook on his lap, concentrated enough that he didn't hear me come down. He looked up. "Gabriel left," I said. I heard the door. I stood in the middle of the room with my keys. The exit was obvious, door in front of me, keys in my hand, no reason to stay. Everything pointed toward leaving. There was a actual second, not metaphor, where I almost left. Where the cautious part of me, the one that had learned not to demand anything from the wrong situations, opened my mouth to say, "All right, see you," with that fake lightness I was good at. Rational. And I watched it pass like an option I wasn't taking. Raphael said, not looking up. No special tone, that the coffee was still hot if I wanted it. Ordinary. The kind of thing anyone says to anyone. No subtext, just coffee, take it or don't. I put my keys in my pocket. We went to the kitchen. He poured 2 cups black, no asking after months he knew. That detail hit me, the quiet attention I didn't even notice he was paying. We stayed in the kitchen for over an hour. I can't describe this conversation linearly because it wasn't linear. One of those that goes deep without warning, bouncing around but always talking about the same thing underneath. Every exchange about itself and a subtext neither of us named. Work, where we grew up, what it means to exist outside other people's expectations, the long version, not the 30-second one. He said something about people who carry things quietly. They have an aura, a particular kind of attention. They read rooms before entering them because they've spent time being watched from the inside. I said there's a difference between being seen and being exposed. For a long time I confused them. That confusion taught me to hide when I didn't need to. Defenses built against dangers that don't exist anymore, kept up even when they're not needed. The silence that followed was different. Raphael looked straight at me. With that attention, someone not thinking about anything else, not waiting for his turn to speak. "What are you doing here, Lucas?" he asked. No accusation, not trying to catch me in a lie. The most honest question anyone could ask, one that acknowledged what was happening without demanding explanations. Asked me to be honest with both of us. No way out. I could have given a safe answer, could have said the coffee was good, I was tired, no rush to leave. Could have done what I'd always done. Keep it ambiguous, where no one commits to any version of reality. Instead, I did something out of character. I told the truth. But what I said and what happened after I said it, that's for the next part. I said I didn't entirely know, but that I didn't want to leave. Not a declaration of love or an invitation, the purest admission I could make, acknowledgement of what was happening without trying to label it more clearly than I could face. Something was there. That's what I said. Raphael looked at me for a moment, that quality of attention I'd learned to recognize, truly taking it in, processing, not reacting on reflex. And then he did something unexpected. He relaxed, not dropping his guard, not surrendering, but like someone holding tension too long who finally lets it change shape. His shoulders shifted, his posture shifted. Relief not from escaping something, but from stopping the pretense that he didn't know what he knew. "Me neither," he said. We stayed in the kitchen. The conversation continued closer, more honest, slower. A new awareness of the space between our bodies, and we didn't pretend it wasn't there. At one point he moved to the counter, and I was already there, and the proximity felt different. There wasn't the typical scene for this. It was quieter, more real. Two men in a lit kitchen who'd spent months navigating something neither named finally stopped pretending they didn't know it. Real conversation. Honesty that changed the air denser, heavier with said and unsaid things. A quiet, inevitable moment where the distance was smaller than ever, and we both knew it, and neither of us stepped away right away. Something strange and simple about being in that kitchen without needing to be anything other than who I was. No Gabriel's best friend, no design trainee, no calibrated version. Just Lucas, 22, who didn't want to leave, with someone who didn't either. That simplicity was what stuck with me, rarer than what brought me there in the first place. And then there was everything else. Gabriel's house, Claudia, who I admired, Raphael's marriage, his entire life, the 22-year age gap, obligations and histories and complexities that silence couldn't dissolve. They didn't go away. Real walls. We both knew them clearly. What happened was this. Two men allowed themselves, on one specific night, to be completely present with the truth between them, without resolving it, without promises, without pretending it was something else or nothing. A noise outside interrupted us, a car speeding by, or the neighbor's dog. I don't remember exactly what anymore. But it was enough for time to start running at its normal pace again. I looked at my watch. It was almost 9 at night. I grabbed my keys from the counter. Raphael said, in that voice that doesn't reveal more than necessary, "Good night, Lucas." No regret in that good night. No pulling back. Acknowledgement, silent confirmation that what happened was real. We both knew it, and it was enough for now. I left. In the car at the first corner, engine running, hands on the wheel, I stayed like that for a full minute. Street ahead was quiet. Traffic light turned green and red for no cars. No relief, no guilt that should have come. Something it took weeks to name, not because it was hard to see, but because it was too simple for such a complicated situation. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I'd just found myself. The weeks that followed were strange. The world stayed exactly the same, and I was different in it. Raphael and I never talked about that night directly. We'd see each other on the usual occasions, lunches at Claudia's, get-togethers with Gabriel, and there was a different silence between us. Not denial, not managed shame, not the discomfort of two people pretending they didn't do something. Settled acknowledgement. Two people who know what they know and decided tacitly to carry it with care and respect for what exists around them. Gabriel didn't find out, not in that sense. The friendship survived more than survived. It grew closer because I stopped being partially absent. When I became fully present, he noticed and was genuinely happy. He didn't ask why because he didn't need to. What really changed was me. 3 months after that night, on a Saturday afternoon with nothing special happening, no event, no trigger, I told Gabriel. I didn't tell him about Raphael. That's my story to figure out. What I told him was about myself, who I was, what I'd spent years not saying because I didn't know the cost until something showed me. Gabriel was silent for maybe 10 seconds. For anyone who knows him, that's how long real processing takes. Then he said, "I already knew. Like I didn't know, but I knew." And he laughed that way only he does, affection and lightness, undoing gravity without diminishing it. Not dramatic. Gabriel, who offered me belonging at 15 with an indifference that hid how much I needed it, and who did the same at 22. No scene, no tears, no long, heavy conversation I'd mentally rehearsed months. His laugh, then, "I'm glad you told me." Then we talked about other things, as if the world kept spinning because it did. Our friendship didn't change, became more honest, which is different and maybe the best possible outcome. I don't know if what happened was right or wrong. I don't have that answer, and it'd be dishonest to claim I do. There are complexities I still carry. Claudia, who didn't deserve to be part of a story that happened in her house without her knowing. Raphael, who has a life that didn't include me and won't. Gabriel, who stayed on the right side of a truth that could have been heavier. But what I do know is that it was real. And real was what I needed to learn to let exist. Not the specific truth about Raphael, not this impossible attraction, but the practice of not erasing what I feel before I know what it is. Raphael wasn't the reason for how I changed, but he was proof I could be seen without falling apart. Truly seen in that dark hallway at 2 in the morning, in that September kitchen, in conversations about architecture and families and spaces that didn't fit and still whole after. That's what stays with you. That's what learning in impossible places leaves with you, with people your life would never allow, in moments you didn't plan and couldn't plan. If you've made it this far, if you recognized yourself, the silent invisibility, dark hallways, the fear that being seen will change everything, then you already know you're not alone. You never were. You learn to exist in the most unexpected places. Sometimes the wrong place, with the wrong person, at the most unlikely time. And still, you learn. Thank you for listening. Until the next confession.